on this beautiful Fargo morning. Staying warm. If you have a jacket that you need to offload, we do have a coat room in the back. Feel free to drop those off. Also, you'll notice that there are complimentary books in the back. Please take a copy. Those are there for you. You can either do that on your way out or on your way in. First, welcome to today's Lawrence Center event. My name is Michael Chan, and I am the Executive Director for Faith and Learning. Overseeing the Lawrence Center is really one of the great privileges and cherished responsibilities that I have here at Concordia College. The center, as the name suggests, honors the life, work, and legacy of Norman M. Lawrenson, renowned philanthropist, former CEO of Burlington Northern, alumnus of Concordia College, and former member and chair of our Board of Regents. Through his life and generosity, Norm helped to build a better, more fruitful, and more trustworthy world. And in honor of that legacy, the Lawrence Center takes up the question, how do we build a more trustworthy world? In today's conversation, we will have a chance to hear from another builder, Kathryn Finney, who is also helping to build a better and just and more joyful world through innovative investment models, education, and through her own example. But before we formally introduce Kathryn, before Kumba formally introduce Kathryn, I want to invite to the podium one of our most important partners and sponsors, Fred Edwards. Fred, if you come and join me at the front, that would be great. Thank you, my friend. So Fred is the founder of Fred's Dissonance and Umoja Writing Workshops, a graduate of NDSU with a master's in educational leadership, and a recent recipient of PBS's Digital Innovator All-Star Program. So I think that's relatively new, right, Fred?
Very.
All right. So I'm just going to invite Fred to share a little bit about the extraordinary work that you're doing here in the community, and thanks again for your partnership, Fred.
Well, first, give it up for Michael Chan. Give it up for Michael Chan. All right. Also, I want to specify co-founder of Umoja Writing Workshops. We got my other founder over there, so shout out to him. And thank you all for being here. I think it's 12:05, so I'm happy that I'm here on time, and I'm very appreciative of that. Two things about myself. We are cultivating a society that feels like they belong, that knows that they belong. And in order to do that, you have to work on people inside and outside. And so that's what we're doing in the Fargo Public Schools. We're now about to start in Moorhead Public Schools on Friday. It's an exciting thing to do, but it's also a crazy endeavor. So if that's something that interests you, whether that be career, exploration, leadership, development, or creating a sense of belonging in North Dakota, Minnesota, please get in contact. The second thing is Fred's Dissonance. When I was a freshman in college, I was actually hit by a drunk driver. It changed the trajectory of my life. And so we created this sober fun activity that ended up cultivating a society of people who wanted to have sober fun, rehabilitation, things for families and friends to do. And so that's what Fred's Dissonance is all about, cultural events and sober fun. And yesterday we had the honor to meet Kathryn, and she's also a Miller. So we from Minneapolis. If you don't know about Millers, it's an important thing for me, but it's just this idea that you can be things outside of what you know. And so me seeing her yesterday was very inspirational. Seeing her this morning was very inspirational. Shout out to Emergent Prairie and the folks over there, because at the end of the day, if you don't see people who look like you in these rooms or in these spaces, sometimes you don't know that it's possible. And so I'm just here to say it's definitely possible. All right.
Amen. All right, thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Kumba Glay. I am the current president of the Concordia Black Student Union, also a junior accounting and finance student here in the Office School of Business. Dr. Chan and I actually started working on keynote events over the summer, so I spent my summer checking in with him and having meetings. I don't regret any bit of it, because here we are today, right? So I wrote an op-ed for this event, so I'm gonna take this opportunity to read it, just in case you didn't see it in the paper. Knowledge is power. However, to gain knowledge, one must be given the access to information. On January 25th, 2023, today, 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. in the Lawrence Center for Faith and Work and the Black Student Union at Concordia College will be hosting a keynote event with Kathryn Finney. Kathryn Finney is a best-selling author, researcher, investor, and entrepreneur. She is also the founder of Genius Guild, a $20 million venture capital fund that invests in Black entrepreneurs in the American community and beyond. This event advances the Concordia Black Student Union's goal of promoting financial intelligence and awareness in the Carver community while also contributing to the Lorenzen Center's series on building a more trustworthy world. Using Kathryn's best-selling book, Build the Damn Thing, which we have free copies of, this keynote conversation would grant the Fargo-Moorhead community access to valuable and wise information while also providing a platform for the community to pose questions to the author herself. It is no surprise that there are systemic changes that need to be made to promote more equity and justice for minorities in the American society, especially amongst Black communities. One of the most significant limitations is access to finance. This stifling reality has dampened opportunities for Black entrepreneurs, limited U.S. economic potential, and diminished innovation. The consequences, however, are not only on the scale of individuals. Generations suffer as a result. Kathryn Finney's work not only raises awareness about these dynamics, but also provides the capital needed to make bring scalable Black businesses to a new level. This keynote is free, as you all know, because you're here. So we want to invite you to please participate as much as you can. Kathryn's like me, she's a communicator, so she has some wise words for you all. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kumba. Kathryn, welcome to Concordia College.
Thanks for having me on today, especially. I was just saying to Michael that it brought me back to my Minnesota childhood, you know, of having to like bundle up for like -5-degree weather and like figuring out, okay, how do I dress for this? And like, what type of hat do I need to bring? Footwear, that was a big one. That was a big one. Like I had to have real footwear. I couldn't do like cute shoes. It had to be, you know, a thick sole. My feet need to be covered. There needs to be some fur inside or something going on inside. So thank you.
You bet. Well, I want to start, Kathryn, with a question. Kumba and I are going to kind of go back and forth for a little bit with some questions to you, and then we will open up the microphones to our audience members, both those in person and those who are joining us virtually. So also a special welcome to our virtual audience. I want to start with a question that I posed to you at Startup Brew. And shout out to our Startup Brew friends at Emerging Prairie. It's so good to have you all here. We had an incredible morning, actually, there over at Drecker Brewery talking about the book and about entrepreneurship and all kinds of interesting things. But this was the first question I posed. So the book's dedication has what I think is a beautiful line, Kathryn. It says, for Christian, I can't wait to see the world you build. And Christian is your son.
Yes.
So what kind of world, Kathryn Finney, are you trying to build, and how is this book helping you to do that?
So Christian is my son. He's 7 years old. And I'm trying to build a world in which everyone wins. And what I mean by that, particularly as an investor, and particularly as a venture capitalist, which is a specific type of investment, I'm trying to build a world where I, as an investor, and those that invest in me win, that the founders we invest in also win, and the communities that they build products for win, that everyone gets an X. And in venture, you know, X means like whatever the return is on your investment. So did I get a 2X, meaning did I get twice the amount that I invested back? Did I get a 3X? Most people in venture shoot for 10X, which now we're in a very interesting market. That may not happen for a lot of people. But how do we create a world where everyone gets an X? So it's not just one group wins. And I think that's super important. I think that's one of the reasons why we have challenges in the world right now, is that it's very one-sided. I was doing a talk where someone was asking me, well, how do you know that this can work? And I said, well, you know, there used to be a world where everyone did get a return. There used to be more stakeholder capitalism rather than shareholder capitalism, which is you had factories that not only did the owners of the factories make money, But also, if you worked in the factory for a certain number of years, you were guaranteed a pension. You knew that you retired, that you were going to have this pot of money. You had enough money to buy a home for your kids. You had enough money. You know, it was more shared. It was more equal. And so it's like there was a time in America where we had that. My father started his life as a brewery worker at Schlitz Brewery in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I remember growing up when Schlitz had these amazing parties for families where people were making livable wages without having a high school diploma. My father didn't graduate from high school until he was in his 30s. And so there was a time where we had this, and we've gone completely away from that time. And so I want us to get back to that. I think that is sustainable. What we're doing, I think we all see that now, is not sustainable. We're on a path, it's just not sustainable to continue this way.
Kumba? Oh, okay, we'll pass.
Here we go, we'll do that.
Okay. Is this on? Okay, I can't hear myself, okay, can y'all hear me better now? Great. Okay, so my question actually is a follow-up from Startup Brew again this morning. So towards the end of the panel, someone had asked a really good question about, navigating negative stereotypes. So it's kind of long, but I'll try to articulate when I read it. So I said, today I started Brew. Someone asked about stereotypes. However, I would like to ask this question from a different perspective. In your book, you talked about taking on the role of the intelligent Black woman in a room where you felt that that perspective was expected of you. Hence, you had to embody it, right? So now with the work that you do, how do you navigate the expected perspective that others put on you?
That's a good question. I think I am fortunate that I've reached a point in my career where I can push back. That wasn't always the case. And you are able to do that once you reach a certain level of success, right? With success comes a bit of freedom. Not a lot of freedom, but a bit of freedom, right? And so what I do is usually directly challenge those who are trying to put me in a box. And I find that that's been really interesting because it's very hard to put me in a box. Prior to the internet, people used to be really surprised when I showed up. I'm Kathryn Finney from Minneapolis. You don't expect me to come into the room, right? So my presence directly challenged people. Even now, I invest in health companies, but I'm a trained epidemiologist. I'm not just an investor. This is what I studied. And so people often challenge me on my knowledge of health. And I'm like, oh, great, this is a great opportunity for me to use my Yale education. My parents will be happy. And so, I always just push back on it. And also the interesting thing that I've learned, and it's been really hard, while some people are challenged by my identity, there's a lot of people who really appreciate the fact that I am 100% me. And these are people for whom their identities are completely different from mine. One of my mentors is Steve Case. He's the founder of AOL. Very much a successful white guy, right? One of the most successful white guys. Guy Kawasaki, who wrote the foreword to my book. These are people whose identities are very different than mine. But by me being me, 100% me, and they know that, I don't mince my words, I look like this going to Sand Hill Road. Any of you who have ever been to the Valley knows that this is not a hot look in Sand Hill Road. It's like Patagonia vest, all bird shoes, maybe a khaki. If you're being really risky, you might wear some jeans. But I show up like this. And as a result, it's really helped me to stand out. And also being myself, and I had to learn this, it is just so much easier and more sustainable. I'm very into sustainability in all areas of life, to just be me. Because then I don't have to worry about how I'm portrayed. I don't have to think when I get up in the morning. I just show up as me. And it's like either you accept me or not, and I'm okay with that. My favorite quote that I think about often comes from, at least friend in my head, RuPaul. How many of you know RuPaul? Yes, friend in my head. I met him once, but in my head, we like have dinner every week. And he says, what other people think about you is none of your business. And I often think of that. It's just such a profound, like, it's what you think about you matters, but what other people think about you is none of your business. You can't do anything about how they perceive you. You can only be the best person you can be. And so I think going back to your point of like, how do you sort of push back against sort of people putting you in a box, people trying to make you be a certain identity, to try to make you represent your entire race or gender or class or city if you're from Fargo or what have you, is that you just show up as you. I mean, you be the best you can be, and then some people are going to get you, and some people just aren't. And, good for them.
Yeah, thanks, Kumba. That's a great question. I want to go back to your response to my first question about the dream and this world that you're building. And I think within our public discourse, there is a kind of line of argument that sees the marketplace and capitalism as an obstacle to the advancement of Black and minority communities. Maybe some of you have heard this line of thinking before. You seem to view the market as a means by which Black and minority communities can improve their standing in life and in this country. Share a little bit of your kind of thinking and your philosophy there.
I think it goes back to the difference between stakeholder and shareholder capitalism. I think the challenge with shareholder capitalism, which essentially those who own equity in a company, I'm being very simplistic here, but those who own equity in a company determine what happens to a company. And that under our current system, the only responsibility you have as a CEO of a company is to your shareholders. There are obviously some laws around employee rights and things, but for the most part, it is to maximize return for your shareholders. That is your fiduciary responsibility, right, as a CEO. It didn't used to always be that way. That was one of the responsibilities you have, but now it's like your primary responsibility. I think it's for us, and there's a lot of discussions that we're starting to see happen, is to expand what does it mean to be a company? What responsibilities do a company have, not only to those who own equity in it, but also to their employees, to the communities in which they are located. And you could see a lot of pushback. A lot of that pushback has come around environmental laws, right? People are like, we don't like them, the pollution, but it's a responsibility you have to where you're located. And I think that's where we're starting to see some discussions and some movement. It's very difficult. I think it's a very tough discussion. It often becomes very political, even though it's really not political. Like, why is clean water political? I mean, we all want to drink clean water. It shouldn't matter what side of the politics you fall on. Or we all want to breathe good air. That shouldn't be a challenge, but it's become that way, and it's been used to divide us. And so I think for us, particularly in the African American community, I think one of the things that the market gives us is the ability to create and also amass generational wealth that then allows us to be able to not only impact our communities, but also impact ourselves individually. And so last night, we were having a discussion, and someone had brought up some of the challenges when you are African American and you sell a company. And we have a number of really major hair care companies that have sold to the Procter & Gamble's and others for significant exits. One being Shea Moisture, which was founded by a Liberian immigrant named Rich Dennis. He sold his company, right? Go Liberia. You're the next one. He sold it to Procter & Gamble for $1.6 billion. He started his company on 125th Street in Harlem as a street vendor and scaled it. And there was a lot of pushback when he sold his company from our communities of like, you sold it, the products changed and things like that. Some of it very valid pushback. But what most people don't realize, as a result of him selling the company, he was able to get money. And he used that money to help save a number of the cultural institutions in our community. One being Essence Magazine, which was in trouble. It was in trouble. Essence is culturally one of the most important publications in the African American community. Like, I knew I made it when I had a feature in Essence Magazine. I will not forget that. It was 2006, Beyonce was on the cover. It was a September 2006 issue, and it was a full page. And I remember when it came out, I do not think there was an Essence Magazine copy in the state of Minnesota because my family bought it out. But I knew I had made it because it was such a big deal to be in Essence. And so he saved it, and he could do it because he had the capital from selling. I was on the board for a while of a preservation organization that was trying to save the mansion of Madam C.J. Walker, who was the first African-American woman millionaire, one of the first women millionaires, period, self-made millionaires in the United States. For years, they were trying to find someone to buy it, and they couldn't, and he was able to buy it. And he was able to buy it, and he's now turning it into an entrepreneurship center. But he was able to do that because he sold his company, right? And so I think it's important for us to understand how capital can be used for positive, that you can do well and do good at the same time. I think we have, the prevailing narratives have always been the opposite, right? We don't have a lot of narratives of people who are being very successful at business, but also being able to contribute to their communities. I started a fund called the Dooney Fund that's named after my grandma, who was incredibly influential to me. I'm named after her. I actually didn't know I was named after her until I was 12 because I called her Dooney. And I would even write letters to Dooney. And the postman would be like, Dooney, isn't your name Mrs. Hell? She's like, just go with it. It's from my grandbaby, And so I'm named after her. She was an entrepreneur. She's a seamstress in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who was really just ahead of her time. She happened to be born in the wrong decade. She was born in 1920s America. And her parents, my great-grandparents, had a restaurant and store in Greenwood, which was part of the Tulsa Massacre. Their home, their business was completely destroyed. And then the family had to move to the border of Kansas and Oklahoma, which is where my grandma was born a year after the Tulsa riot. So I grew up with this legacy. I grew up with this woman who had a small business, and I saw how much she struggled. I also saw, particularly as I reflect back of, oh my gosh, she would have been the next, Cardi B, if she was born now, or, Rihanna and had her own Fenty line, if she was born much later, 70 years later or so. But she was born in 1920s America. And so when COVID happened and I saw how many other women of color were struggling, I took my own money that I had from a vacation that was never going to happen. We were supposed to go on a cruise to Alaska, leaving from Seattle in April of 2020. If you remember, that was the epicenter of COVID. I still don't think that cruise is left. It was just never gonna leave. Took that money and was you know what, I'm just gonna give these micro investments to other Black women entrepreneurs because I know how hard it is. I know that we're not receiving the PPP loans because you had to, at that time, at the beginning, have a private banker. And those of you who applied early, you probably know what I'm saying. If you did not have a connection directly with a banker at one of the banks that already had set up systems to receive the funds, the first 1 or 2 rounds of PPP loans you were not getting. The system was just completely messed up. And so it's this is just little money, like baby, you can do it money, the money that my grandmother would often send me. And so we ended up giving, in a 6-week time period, with a system that we hacked together because we're all entrepreneurs and all tech people, we ended up giving over $150,000 worth of, we call them micro investments, in over 1,000 Black women entrepreneurs. And since then, we've given out over $250,000 worth of investment in over 2,000 Black women entrepreneurs. But I was able to do that because I sold my company. And I was in a financial position to be able to do that. If I hadn't sold my company, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
And that was Budget Fashionista,
Budget Fashion.
which was your first tech company, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
In the late 90s?
No,
Early
I'm not that
2000s.
old.
I'm sorry. Whoops.
I mean, I'm old, but not that old. Like,
2003. Yeah.
I sold it. I started it in 2003, and I sold it in 2012.
Got it. Okay.
So I have a follow-up question to that from last night. So a very good friend of mine, her name is Alicious. She's also a business major. She had a lot of pushback to that. So on the way back home, we were talking about exiting and how can Black entrepreneurs be more open with the Black community about where they're putting their investments. So my question to that is, how can we hold entrepreneurs within our community accountable? How can we bridge that communication, barrier? That's because all we're thinking is it just left us in the mud. Like, now I gotta pay $10. It's affordable, but it's not good for my hair, right? So how can we bridge, work with that and know what's going on?
I think one of the things is inviting people to speak, like me. I think, two, getting our community comfortable talking about money, which is a challenge in our community. Some of us are taught that money's bad. Money isn't bad, people are bad, right? And how people use money can be bad. But money in and of itself is not bad. And so how do we, it's about getting more of us to be more open and talking about how we did what we did. I take it as a personal responsibility of me to come and talk. And I have a particular affinity for any group that's led by, a Black woman. If it's like Minneapolis, because I get to go talk to my family, I get to see my family. So whenever I can, it's like, if it's a Minneapolis speak, yes. I live in Chicago. If it's Chicago, and it's pretty easy for me, yes. And so I make it a point personally when I can to be available and to be really honest about my experience and my perspective. And I think getting more of us to do so. I have a lot of friends who are, very successful name brand people, and, encourage them to come and talk. Not just when Harvard or Yale, whomever invites you, because there's prestige with that, but making sure that you are available. If your local high school calls you and they're able to set up an event where you get to talk to thousands of students, and you're already going to be in the city anyway, and you get to visit your family, making sure that you're available to be able to talk. And I think you're now seeing more and more, particularly African American successful folks, being really open about the process. I think last night I talked about T.I. And how he did an amazing podcast where T.I. is a rapper, for those of you who don't know, very successful rapper, who talked about how the record business works. He broke it down. He talked about what is a 360-degree deal. That's a deal where, the record companies get a piece of everything that you do. Why you don't want that deal. Why you should turn down that initial $1 million that they come with you with. Because they're going to take a piece of everything you do. Not just your music, but also your sponsorship. If you do a clothing line, they get a piece of that. And how amazing it would have been for up-and-coming artists 5 years ago to hear that, right? From someone who was successful. But now we're starting to have more people talk, and they're getting more freedom. And I think also, with success, T.I. and others are in a position where they can talk and they don't have to worry about repercussions, right? Because there was real repercussions if someone like T.I. would have explained the real about how the industry works 10 years ago. But now he's T.I., he's in a position, he has money, his money has money. We like to say his bank has a bank. And so he doesn't have to worry about the repercussions. So there can be a bit of freedom. The only thing I would say in terms of a pushback is I want to make sure that we don't have unrealistic and unfair expectations of successful Black people that we don't have of others. Because then we start to suffocate ourselves. So I want to make sure that we have, and there are expectations that I should have. There are people who supported me to get to where I'm at. It is my duty to make sure that I represent and weigh. It's to honor my grandmother, to honor Washburn High School where I went. But, I want to make sure that the expectations are in line, that it's not so much that then I'm not able to grow and do the things I need to do.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So there are a lot of business students here. We're right next to the Office School of Business. And I have a question about when somebody approaches you with a funding proposal or a business idea, what are you looking for in that kind of, because you have seen a lot of proposals, I have to imagine. A lot of proposals. Some for micro lending, some I'm sure for bigger, for bigger projects. What are you really looking for? What sets you gives you a sense that this is going to be a good investment?
So I'm really fortunate that I also have a team. And usually someone, like one of my team members travels with me because we're always like looking for new companies. No one like rolls their hand to come to Fargo in January. They're like, Kathryn, you do not pay me enough to do that. But what I look for in just the team in general, and we talk every day about this, is we look primarily for companies that are led by people who have domain knowledge. And what I mean by that is that you have experience and knowledge in the area in which you're building your company. So we'll often see people who are like rocket scientists but want to do a hair care company. And I'm like, building a hair care company, a consumer goods company, is not as easy as you think. Do something in rocket science, please, because that makes sense, right? That's what you know. That's what you've built your career. That's where you have a network. And so as an investor, I know that when you build the company, you're going to have, early people to try it out. You're going to have some relationships that will help you get customers, whether it's, business to business, B2B, or consumer. Like, you'll have some idea of how the space works. You'll have other mentors. You might have access to other investors. As a VC, and I think one of the things that people sometimes don't understand, when you're raising funding for your company, rarely would you have a single VC firm write an entire check for your company. This really doesn't happen. And the reason why is we want to de-risk it for ourselves. Like, for me, I want other investors involved because that means that you're going to have a bigger network, you're going to have more help. So you might have an investor that writes 50% of your round, and then you have to go raise the other 50% from other investors. If you have domain experience in what you're building, the likelihood of you being able to know the other investors in the space and getting them to sign on is much higher than if you just came into the space and you don't have any network, you don't know anyone. So that's a big one. We also look for founders, at least on our end, and this hasn't always been in venture, but now it's become a very big thing, of founders who are good people. There used to be a belief, and I don't want to swear because we're in North Dakota, but
We're in Minnesota at this point.
oh, we're in Minnesota, so I can swear.
Just a few minutes apart.
I went over the bridge, now I can swear. There used to be this thought that the bigger the asshole a founder was, the better the company. Seriously, coming out of the valley. Like, if he was arrogant and he was like not great, then he's going to make a great founder. Obviously, we all see the news. That's not the case, right? And so there's been a shift now to really asking yourself, is this a good person? For me as an investor, the investment we're making in you, it's like 10 to 15 years. It can take that long to realize an investment. That means we're going to be working together for 10 to 15 years. That means I'm going to be getting texts from you for 10 to 15 years. If you are not a good person, I don't want to get texts from you for 10 to 15 years, right? Like, and so now you're seeing a lot of investors asking themselves, is this a good person? Is this somebody who I want to be in relationship with? Because it is a relationship, it's a partnership for 10 to 15 years. So that's a big criteria. Those are the two biggest. Your team, your ability to convince other people to join you. How good are you at sales? as an entrepreneur, it's not just selling to potential customers, it's also selling to potential employees, particularly when you're in the early stage and you just have a dream and a vision, and you've got to convince people to come and work for you. And I talk about that in the book. And oftentimes the first people you convince, particularly if you don't come from a lot of wealth or you don't have really a network, is usually your family. Those are the first people, your family and friends, those are usually your first employees because, they're cheap. You can offer them like a coffee or something, or maybe not, or your mom just like, I'll call you every Sunday if you can help me out on this. But it's often your family, right? Those are the first people you have to sell on your idea. And so are you good at selling people? Are you good at getting people to join you and convincing you, sharing the vision, particularly at the very early stages before you have a product?
Thanks for that. Well, I think what we want to do now is kind of break open the conversation a little bit. We'll be monitoring questions online, but for those of you who are in the room, if you'd like to pose a question, we have a microphone right here at the front. So let's break it open now. What are your thoughts? What are you thinking?
You can ask anything.
Y'all don't have a question. I do have one question. Should I ask?
Yeah. Well, someone's coming up. You want to ask?
You can go first, and I'll go after you.
Hi, I'm Gwen Hallis, and I have a question that comes out of an experience that some of us had recently at a women's leadership breakfast at a conference. And you touched on this a little bit right at the beginning about the glass ceiling. How do you break through to be recognized as successful or as a leader? But we also talked about the glass cliff, so that once you get there, it may be that you have gotten to a job that isn't going to allow you, for different reasons, to be yourself or to have success in the way that you have the skills and the experience for. Or that you get to a leadership position that then, because you have it, isn't supported in some way by funders or others that you work with. So I just wondered if you would talk a little bit more about that as a woman, as a Black woman, and it may be different for you as an entrepreneur or a venture capitalist, but talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Gwen. And it's not that much different. There's been a lot of discussion, actually, in the past 2 years or so. There's been some pretty public failures of women CEOs. So it's like Theranos is like the big one. There was a big thing about one of the founders of Away, the luggage folks. Was it Glossier, the big beauty company, also had a whole bunch of stuff. Some very public failures of women CEOs. That was, and the discussion, particularly from the tech and startup space, was much more harsh than on the very public failures of men. Notably Adam Newman of WeWork, massive public failure, right? Now we're in the middle of FTX, massive public failure, much, much larger. And so there's been a lot of discussion about how unfair it has been, that these women have reached the top. Granted, some of the failures of their own doing, we're not saying that it wasn't, but the criticism was so much more harsh for them. The failure was so much more harsh. It was jail time and other stuff than it was for folks who actually did worse. FTX is basically collapsing a whole market. That's not what happened with Theranos, right? And so I think as a woman, this is something we talk about a lot, is how do we make it so not only do we break through the ceiling, but once we're there, we don't slide down, right? And how do we create spaces to do that? And that's something that's happening as we speak. It has not been created yet. And one of the things that we have learned is, one, creating mentorship and networks where we can talk amongst ourselves, particularly when we're in trouble. Because it's very hard when you're the only one in the room and people don't want you. Your identity is kind of counterintuitive to who they think success should be, to be really honest when you need help, when you need to figure out a problem. And so making sure that we create networks for women to be able to have these really honest conversations with each other. So I'm a part of a number of networks of women general partners of venture funds, where we share like information that even a year ago would have been impossible to get, about like, how do you structure your fees? Who actually works for fund admin? Like all these things that no one shared with us before. And now we have our own networks and we're able to share, or if there's a particular challenge with a limited partner, we're able to ask, well, how did you handle it? Well, this is how I handled it. This is how to think of it. So I think for women, it's about us creating networks where we can talk honestly with each other and share feedback with each other, to help us navigate in these sort of spaces. I think, two, it's about us also reclaiming a bit of our power. I mean, one of the hottest markets in tech right now is women's health, investment. Like, again, 2 years ago, you could not find a VC that was willing to invest in women's health. It was like non-existent. You would think women didn't need healthcare, apparently. And so now it's the hottest market. And that's, again, us reclaiming our power, us being able to see this sort of challenge of people underestimating us as an opportunity, as a business opportunity. So that means that you're able to get in spaces that they don't know about yet. So one of my friends, Dina Shakir of Lux Capital, she's one of the earliest investors in women's health. Now she is like a rock star, like everywhere. Her portfolio is like crazy. But 2 or 3 years ago when she was investing, people are like, we'll give you like $1 million, $2 million here. And she's like, okay, I'll take it, because I know what's going to happen in a couple of years. And as a result, she's been able to be in this position of power and really define how investment in women's health is happening. So I think it's us creating spaces where we can talk amongst each other honestly and share information honestly without fear of repercussion, without fear of it getting out to networks and being used against us. I think that's really important. And then it's also about us reclaiming our power and understanding the power in being underestimated from a business perspective, and how that can help us create domain knowledge and experience that other people don't even know they need to have yet. And then once they realize it, then it's okay, you're the expert now. And when you become an expert, making sure that you get equitable pay and making sure that you ask for what it is that you need. That's another thing that I see with a lot of women founders and women in corporate. It's like, now you become the expert. We still are a little bit afraid to ask for what it is that we need, even though we now have this position of power.
Well, I, of course, want to invite folks to line up here at the microphone if you have questions, and maybe while doing so, Kumba, do you want to pose yours?
So my question was related to, I don't want to say the multiple career fields you're in, because you said you still like appear as you. It's more towards the value of, your beliefs and your morals that you carried along with you in those different aspects of your life. I wanted to ask, what's the one thing that hasn't changed, regardless of where you're at?
Oh, gosh. I mean, there's a couple. Like, I love fashion. And there was a period of time, I started this social enterprise called Digital Undivided that was really focused on getting more Black and Latinas into the startup space. I started it after I sold my company, because it was like, I want more of us to have startups. I saw the power of having economic freedom, allowing me to live a life that I chose. And so I wanted more of us to have that power. And so I went into tech. This was like 2012. And I remember going to Silicon Valley, going to Sand Hill Road. For those of you who don't know, Sand Hill Road is where all the VCs are located. Lots of, again, Allbird, lots of Patagonia vests. I'm like, if I wear a Patagonia vest, it's going to be bedazzled. It's going to be a little bit different. And feeling real pressure to like dress like that. And a lot of my friends, my female friends, felt a lot of pressure to not be themselves. Like, you couldn't wear cool shoes. You had to like downplay literally who you were. Um, and I felt that pressure. And for a while I did it, and I was just like, this is not sustainable. Like, it's not sustainable for me to not be myself. And so, and they're not like writing checks with me dressing like them. So I might as well be myself, and those who get it will get it. And so that's one thing that's been constant. I think for me, keeping relationships with my friends is super important to me and my family. It makes no sense having money if your kids don't like you. It makes no sense having money to me if my mom doesn't want to speak to me or my brother doesn't like me. Someone asked me what the definition of success was, and I said, the fact that my 20-year-old nephew, who's in college, in some place an hour north of here in North Dakota, drove last night during flurries and snow to come see his aunt, who he only got to spend like 15, 20 minutes with, to me, that's success, right? That is success, because he could have been doing a lot of other stuff. And I think when I was 20, I would have been doing a lot of other stuff. But the fact that he did that, that's success. And so that hasn't changed for me, of really centering what matters. My family, my community, all those things have always been important to me. Those are the things that help keep me human, and centering my humanity is super important to me. I also, I think one of the things that hasn't changed is like finding ways to connect with others. That is an advantage of growing up in Minnesota and Minneapolis, is that I know how to talk to pretty much anyone. There is not a person that I do not know how to connect with in some way. I can find a way for us to connect while still being me, right? And so that's something that hasn't changed as well.
One of our great partners, Jenny Sheets, I think, has a question. Jenny, if you wouldn't mind, Jenny from Emerging Prairie, if you wouldn't mind taking the mic there.
Hi, thank you, Kathryn, for coming out to speak. You're such an inspiration. So I'm a new mom, so time management is at the top of my mind. You have founded several very successful companies. You started a fund. You're raising money for those funds. You're a mom, and then you wrote a book. Can you give us advice on how you do it? And you seem so calm and cool, collected, and real advice on how to just stay sane, but also just keep driving.
Oh my gosh, thank you. First of all, Emerging Prairie is like the bomb. I had so much fun. The energy was so amazing. If you don't know about it, you really need to know about it and go. That's such a great question of like, how do you manage it all? And I would first say that I would not be here without the women whose work allow me to do my work. And I always try to honor them, meaning, my housekeeper. I make sure that she's well paid. I mean, first of all, I have a 7-year-old, and those of you who have a 7-year-old, you understand what I'm saying. Because I don't have the time to take hours to clean my house. She makes sure that my house is clean, that helps me do my work. I would not be able to do all the work I do if she didn't do that. And so I need to make sure she's honored. I need to make sure that she's well paid. I need to make sure that she understands how important she is. The teachers at my son's school, right? And then also the paraprofessionals who also support them, who allow me to work during the day, who educate my son, who takes care of them. My ex-husband, my co-parent, who is incredibly supportive of my career. I mean, rarely do you hear, people are like, oh my God, you're divorced and you guys get along great. I'm like, yes. He's very supportive of my career, who allows me to switch days so I can come to Fargo. And is very open with that. And so it's really understanding that you can't do it all by yourself, that you need help. You need help. I talk in the book about how when we first moved to Atlanta and I was doing Digital Undivided, and my husband at the time was like traveling a lot because he was leading startups in the Southeast for Microsoft, and I just could not find great caregiving for my son. I was like at wit's end. He was at a nursery school where all the kids just looked like really sad. It was like, I mean, I joked there was like a kid who always had like a snotty nose, and every time I would pick up my son, the kid was like looking at me like, "Can you take me too?" And I'm like, "I'm sorry." And you know, the parent was like working really hard. And I called my mother, who's retired, who's a widow, living a fabulous life in New Mexico. And I was like crying. I was like, I need help. I just need help. Like, I just can't, I just need help. And she's like, do you want me to come? Now, I'm thinking she's coming for like a week or two. I'm like, sure. She ended up staying 4 years. She helped raise my son. My son is very close with his grandma. Very, very close. She would pick him up from school. They would walk together. They would go to coffee. I mean, they had a whole, like, situation there. But there's no way I would be able to build Digital and Divided, which is now, you know, in 6 cities and 8-figure budget and things like that, if it hadn't been for her help. Just wouldn't have been able to. And the fact that I didn't ask for it. And I think that's one of the things as moms, sometimes we think we have to do everything. And there are people who want to help us. And we have to not be afraid to ask for it because we literally cannot do everything. And we shouldn't even try. It's like, it's not good. And that also, so that's one thing, asking for help. Another thing is making sure I carve out time for self-care. Remember I had a cousin, still have the cousin, but she had when she had her first child, and I was like, and she's like, you know, I just don't even have 5 minutes to take a shower. And I'm like, how do you not have 5 minutes to take a shower? You have a husband. Tell him to watch the kid for 5 minutes so that you can take a shower. Like he can do that, right? Like it's 5 minutes. You know, I remember when my son was first born, well, he wasn't first born, he was like just starting to walk and stuff. And I said to someone, I used to hide out in my closet for just 5 minutes, just like mommy time. 5 minutes. And he would even, if you asked him now, he's like, yeah, that's mommy time. She's in there for 5 minutes. I was like, I just need 5 minutes. Like, that's all. Just to center myself, to do some breathing, some meditation. And so I think as moms, or even if you're a single parent, taking that 5 minutes, you can do that. It's okay for you. It's important for your kids to see you do that. Because also, when you're in this position of always like responding, always like going, that also sends a notice to your kids that self-care is not important too. And so now my son will say, it's kind of funny, he's like, you know, I just need a couple of minutes right now. And I'm like, you know what? You go take a couple of minutes. He's like, I'm just relaxing. That's what he told me the other day. I was like, you know what? I love that. You go relax for a couple of minutes. He's like, I had a hard day at school. I'm like, okay, I hear you. But it's because of me as a mom saying, you know, I just need 5 minutes, and then we're on. We could do whatever, but can you just give me 5 minutes? And it's okay to do that.
Yeah, thanks. Do we have maybe 1 or 2 last questions? Yeah, you two get to the last 2 questions.
Okay.
We can go over a little bit. Yeah.
My name is Ian, and I wanted to say thank you for coming out here. It's been really inspiring to hear you speak. And thanks for coming out to the frozen tundra. It's not the easiest trip for anybody. One of the things that I've heard you talk about that's really resonated with me is that you talk about building a world where everyone wins. And that's something that, as an entrepreneur, you know, I want to build a community around me so that way, you know, not only my business but the values last. And so my question is, how do you build the culture and instill the values in the people in your portfolio? How do you do that, you know, to build that community, to build that world?
Thank you, Ian. So one of the first things we did, and this is something I learned from my other company that I built, when we were starting Genius Guild, was to spend time, and people thought I was really crazy, on core values. What is it that we stand for? Who are we? Our first core value is be human. That's the first and most important, like be human, recognize humanity in others, but also in ourselves. And that means as human beings, sometimes we win and sometimes we fail, and being okay with that. and not being so hard on ourselves and giving ourselves grace. So we spent a lot of time on core values. Then as a CEO, I realized that I have to live the core values, right? Like, it can't just be like paper, because most people do core values and it's like get put somewhere and maybe trot it out when you're doing the investment. It's like, I've got to make sure I live it. And the way that I make sure I live it is that I also have to empower others in our organization to call me when I'm not living it, and call me on it. And it's only been like 1 or 2 times that's happened, fortunately. But our chief of staff, Charmaine, she is like she holds our core values. and she has permission, explicit permission, to call me if I'm not living up to them. And to anyone in our organization that's not living up to them. That can be scary as a head of something, to give someone else that power. But what that's allowed us to do, and me personally, is to make sure that I'm living what I say I'm living. So what I'm saying to you is who I really am, right? And it's not just words, it's like actually something that I live. And so spending time with your organization and your company, really defining what it is that you stand for, and then empowering others in the organization to also call you on it as the leader, and to make sure that in every area you're living up to that, including our limited partners. There are people, and people thought I was really crazy, that I said no to. When we were first starting our fund, it was a very well-known venture fund that wanted to come in and wanted to take a percentage of our management company, meaning the management company is kind of what I'm the head of. We're the ones who kind of run the funds. The limited partner are the people who really give you the money for your venture fund, right? It's a simplistic way of explaining it. But, and they wanted to take a part of our management company. And I was like, we have this like core values where we really pride ourselves on investing in our community and being domain experts in our community. I don't want this external fund to have no experience investing in our community being my boss, because they don't know. They know a lot about investing, that's true, but they don't know about how to invest in what many would consider a new market. It's not a new market, but they would consider it a new market. And so I said no, and it was a lot of money. And it was my chief of staff who was like, we were going back and forth because it's really hard to say no to that money. And she's like, how does this fit? How do they fit in our core values? Literally, that's what she said to me. And I was like, they don't. Like, we can't say yes. And it was really hard. People thought I was really crazy. It was really hard to say no to that. It ended up being like the correct and best decision, but it was really hard.
I believe it. Well, I just want to pause here for a second, but before we invite our next questioner up and say, I know some of you have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. It is 1 o'clock right now. If you need to filter out, that's okay. No hard feelings at all. But Kathryn has generously agreed to kind of extend our time, so please feel free to stay. If you need to filter out, that's no problem. Let's invite our next guest up. Thank you.
And I'll also sign books, too.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah.
You just answered my second question, so thank you.
Awesome.
First one is, do you have a Cash App? Because I ain't got no cash for the book.
So the book is free today.
Yeah, the books are all free.
Yes.
Oh, all right.
No worries there.
I can give you my Cash App if you just want to send me something.
You know what?
I'm not going to turn it down, but the book is free.
Essence of a true businesswoman. My name is Troy. It's good to see some of the people I know up in here. Long story short, I have 2 questions. How do you keep your peace?
First is self-care. That has been something I had to learn, because I think, particularly being a Black woman, self-care has always been like last on our list. So one of the things that I do is like swim 3 times a week. I know everyone at the pool. I'm the only Black woman there. And so everyone knows, and it's like really great. So I swim 3 times a week. That's been really helpful. I also go to church. And I know a lot of folks are, non-religious, and I'm not pushing religion on anyone.
Don't worry, this is a Catholic university.
Okay. Lutheran.
Even more so.
Lutheran.
Hey. That's me going to MSUM right there.
Yeah, right?
And, like, it's my first time coming up in here, so.
Yeah, thank you. But it's been really important for me, like spiritually, being, especially in a space like venture capital, which can challenge you spiritually at times, to be in community with others who are coming together to worship, to be positive, to uplift. And so every time I come out of church, like I feel like I can do whatever I need to do. Like it helps me to be myself more because I know I have this community behind me. So that's really important. I take vacations. I found that it was really important for me to schedule vacations, so that I have something to look forward to. It's kind of like I go hard. Like I work really, I really go hard. I think those of you who were at Emerging Pray know, like I stayed and signed every book. I talked to anyone who wants to talk to me. I will stay to the end. And I realized that in order for me not to get burnt out, I have to schedule a vacation. And it needs to be something fabulous. And it needs to be something that I'm like, as I go to the paint, I know I have this coming up. So this summer, and I learned that last year. So this past summer, I went to Italy and to Greece. It was amazing. In March, I'm going to Paris, right? Like I know it. So as I like go hard for the next like 3 months, I'm on a plane every week. I'm doing all this stuff. I know in March I got that, and then no one contacts me, because again I have the most brilliant chief of staff. She is like no joke. She's on vacation now herself, who is just like, we got it. You go do you. We need you to shut down for a week or two so that you come back and you can go hard again. And so that's been really, really important. Making sure that I have days in which I'm not working. So I usually don't work on Saturdays and Sundays unless it's like really, really important. That's time for my son. Those of you who have kids understand that's also like a lot of birthday parties. I just got a bunch of emails. I'm like, every kid born in February? That's been important. From a business standpoint, what I've done is Fridays are usually no contact days, meaning like I'm not taking calls, I'm not doing Zooms, because what I was finding is I wasn't having time to read. I wasn't having time to like learn and absorb new information because I was in Zooms every hour of the day. So I wasn't like, how am I going to keep up with trends? How am I going to keep up with what's going on in the space? How am I going to be able to read a good book? That's a business-related book, right? If I'm scheduled like from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., Zoom. So I needed a day where I wasn't in Zoom. And also being behind the screen was just like not fun for me. I like talking to people in person. Yeah.
So, like, real quick, I used to live in Paris, and March is my birthday, so.
Oh,
I'll
I
give
need
you
pointers.
Yeah, I'll give you a gift on that part. It won't be the Cash App, though.
Okay, that's okay.
My last question was, though, kind of relating to people. I realized I straddle the fence between, I realized being in like 24 different countries around the world, like I realized like I've gone the extra mile for myself, but I still straddle the fence between, I realize I haven't gone the extra mile for like my own people as much as I think I ought to, versus when I do that, the return effect or the expectation effect doesn't come back. How do you try to work or navigate through that? Is that like a coherent question?
How do you give and manage the expectations you have in return, right?
Unnecessary expectations, just when anything in business or any type of relationship, you try to see, okay, what's going to be the end result, and then it just goes left field.
Yeah.
Especially like when we work with our own people sometimes.
Yeah.
So I realized, like, what can we do to try to bridge that gap in a way where it's effective for everybody, but how do you manage that? Because there's some times where I'm sure you've done some business and it just went left field, and it's like, well, how do you navigate after that?
I think it's a challenge when you come from a marginalized, resource-poor community, right? A community that has not always had access to resources. And so there's a lot of things we do not know about business, about even, just how things move in the world, right? And not necessarily through any fault of our own. It's that we have not had access to information. I think one of the challenges is that when you are someone who comes from one of the communities, and this is not just a challenge in African American communities, it's also a challenge in Latino communities, it can be a challenge in communities of women, in immigrant communities in general, it's a challenge, right? When you are someone who has access to certain information, or that you have access to resources, not just money, how do you navigate sharing the resources with your community, right? And sometimes the resources are not necessarily what your community wants to hear. And that can be, and you can get a lot of pushback. And there could be a lot of reputational risk to you, right? And how do you manage that? And that's something that I manage every day because, controlling, even though I am a micro fund in the context of venture capital, any fund less than $100 million is considered a micro fund. Most venture capitalists, the top ones that you know of, are managing billions of assets under management, which is called AUM. They're managing billions of dollars, right? But even at the 20 million that I manage, I'm still one of two Black women who have a fund that big, right? So managing the expectations of our community around that becomes very difficult because there are certain rules that I have to follow. We are registered with the Securities Exchange Commission, the SEC. They look at me. I have to do. The IRS cares very much about what I do, so I have to be very careful. And explaining that to our community can be really difficult. What I've learned is I try to share as much information as I possibly can and allow people to do with that information what they will. I try to be honest, even though that can be sometimes hard in our communities, about what the expectations are. And that can be challenging. I mean, we actually have it's so interesting. I was looking at emails today, and our director of portfolio, who's an amazing woman named Jen Van Dam, is actually in the middle of managing the expectation of a company that pitched to us. And we're probably not going to be able to invest in them because they're too close to another portco in our portfolio. And this company is kind of indignant and really angry and reaching out to our portfolio to ask, well, what's their process and why are we not getting investment and things like that. And one of our portcos or portfolio companies just text me and how do I respond to this? And I said, you don't. Your job is not to do that. Your job, you're in the middle of raising your next fund or your next investment. You don't need to talk to them about that. I don't want you as an investor getting into, let us handle that. But it can be hard to manage those expectations. And so what we have done is just publishing how we look at investments, being very clear. Sometimes we have to say things over and over again. Here's our expectation. Here's our process. There is no shortcut. We're not, here's how we judge and how we determine how we make investments. That might not resonate with you, but it's how we do things. And, we're not going to alter that or change that. But it can be really hard. And the only thing I've learned that helps that process is being honest with your truth and communicating and over communicating, which is an extra burden that we have to take on. Yeah.
Thanks. I think we got time for one last question, or maybe we can do two. Is that all right, Kathryn? Are you?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm in
let's do
Fargo.
two more.
Let's party.
All right. And the mic will go to you last, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Party in Fargo. That is something. You piqued my interest when you said you had a background in health.
Yeah.
I think some things I know Fred, Ian, and Troy we've been seeing, particularly in the African American community, has been a lot of health concerns. So first question it's a two-part question,
Okay.
past and future. Are you familiar with the newfound research, say in RNA and people's traumatic past histories?
About in terms of the genetic imprints that happen from past traumas in our history? Yes.
Correct. So regarding entrepreneurship, do you think that that sort of comes up when, particularly in the African American community, I might feel some like innate feeling to just be afraid, right, to even have these conversations? Um, do you know, is there any real world, I guess, even data that we can look at to track? And do you have any background information like regarding any of that stuff, particularly in the African American community?
So, in terms of the research, it's an emerging field of research on the possible genetic changes that have happened as a result of, continuous trauma. And there's a lot of, it's really compelling. It's still new, but saying that communities that have experienced long periods of trauma, in the case African American communities, 400 years of enslavement, how that might have changed things on a genetic level for us, which is really, really interesting. And so there's a lot of new research on it. It's still emerging. In terms of just from a psychological standpoint, as I mentioned before, my family had a restaurant and home in Greenwood during the Tulsa riots and destroyed. I mean, literally, my family has been fighting for like 100 years to get the insurance payment. Still hasn't happened because they were told that it was their fault that the riots happened. And so, what would have happened if my grandparents had been allowed, or my great-grandparents had been allowed to continue their business uninterrupted, right? If they were just allowed to be successful business people, not any extra money, no one's asking for quote-unquote handouts, just allowed to be successful business people, uninterrupted, right? What would have happened generationally? They later actually sent all their kids, this is in 1940s America, they sent all their children to college, right? Still, after all of that, was able to do that. But imagine what would have happened if they had continued to be successful and allowed to be successful. And I think what has happened, we've had a number of examples. Tulsa is not the only example. There's Rosewood, there's a whole bunch of other examples of communities led by particularly African American, successful, communities, economic centers that were destroyed. And so you create this system where people were afraid to try. They were afraid to build. I mean, wouldn't you? If you built a successful business and all of a sudden someone decides, you're a little too successful, I'm gonna just destroy it, you would be afraid to rebuild too, right? And so it's created this sort of generational trauma where we are afraid to do what we actually were very good at, which was creating our own sort of economic centers. I think the thing that's happening now, and I actually give credit to hip hop for doing this, is we're now starting to see comfort in taking risks. We're now starting to see and share information about how to create wealth within our community. We're now seeing a number of folks are getting more comfortable with entrepreneurship. I think hip hop, I think also the creator economy is creating a lot of opportunities. One thing I would share is I remember, this was maybe 2 years ago. No, it wasn't 2 years ago, it was a year ago. We're kind of headed towards the end of the pandemic, and I was at a business conference, big business conference. Someone stood up and, what do I do? Because people don't want to work for me. And, I can't afford it. They don't want to work. They don't want to do that. And this person owned a chain of fast food companies or fast food restaurants, well-known brand in Chicago. And I said, why would an 18-year-old from the south side of Chicago want to work for you standing on their feet, making $8 an hour, when they can be a creator on Instagram, have fun with their friends, do videos, get brand partnerships, and could make, 3 or 4 times that in a week without having to ruin their feet, their posture, their skin because they're in hot grease. Why would they want to do that? Like, what is your value proposition to them to come work for you? Because they don't have to anymore. And that's because the creator economy has created like thousands, millions now of mini entrepreneurs. Like, we have mini content empires. And it's been pretty incredible. I love it. So if you were an 18-year-old African-American kid, in Chicago, 5 years ago, the only option didn't graduate from high school was to go work at Taco Bell. Now you can create your own entrepreneurship mini empire and make much more money and be fabulous, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. You off of that, you probably gave me like 10 other questions, but I'm gonna try to stay
Okay.
on track here. The second part of that question was really based off what you said, which was looking into the future, even with content creator. But just to circle back to health, like future for the African American community regarding that sort of genetic makeup.
Yeah.
We work with a lot of youth and families where it just seems like the psychological effects of what's currently happened and then what has happened before, it almost seems impossible to even bring up the idea of content creator, but it's not, right? Because we see it's happening. But what are some even mindfulness practices? I heard you speak about that. And just some other things that we can connect families to that you may have some information on that would be good for sort of breaking that traumatic past history cycle and just opening up our psyche to new opportunities.
So I think one of the things is, connecting with someone like Michael. And the reason why I say that is, Michael brought me here, right? And when they're bringing someone to speak, say either can I invite my community here and how do we get them here? Or can you ask if this person would be willing to speak to the community too? Because I think particularly for our communities, the visual is so important. Like, it's so important for them to actually meet someone like me. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, because it's one thing to read and it seems like so far away. It's another thing oh my gosh, I just spent 30 minutes with this person who's successful and they told me about how they got to where they were and all the challenges and stuff. And so I think, partnering with Concordia, partnering with North Dakota State or whomever, and saying, hey, when you bring people here, particularly who are African American, can you make sure that we can invite our people? Can you make sure that I get an email too? And then maybe piggybacking, because once I'm in Fargo, right? Can you ask them to speak for 30 minutes? Or if they're not able to, can I maybe bring some folks to have lunch with them so that they get exposure? Because I think in our community, that's one of the challenges is you almost need to see someone who's successful, that looks like you, who comes from the same space as you. And that becomes super, super important in breaking down that sort of mindset.
Yeah, thanks. Mike, I couldn't tell. Were you going to pose a question? Oh,
Go
why don't you
ahead.
get
We're
the
still
last
here,
one?
yeah.
Yeah, this is great. We'd love to hear from you.
I love the Mohawk. Yes.
You're fascinating.
Thank you.
So one of the first things you said when you look at a company that you are considering investing in is this person in their domain? So I have kind of a hypothetical question to ask you. Let's say this beautiful young woman comes to you, a Yale-trained epidemiologist, and tells you she wants to start a fashion company. What are the things in that young woman and her idea that, even though it seems to be outside of the domain, that makes you want to invest in that?
So I probably wouldn't invest if she was a fashion company because it falls outside of our thesis and where we focus as an investor. However, that's my story, but that's not my investment thesis. Two different things. No, why would that be ironic? No, it's not ironic. I have a very clear thesis in which I invest in. So my background is actually as an epidemiologist. I fell into fashion because of my interest of fashion. And I started so early that when I was writing blogs, there was like only 75,000 blogs. This was in 2002, 2003. So it was 20 years ago. And it started off as a hobby, the blog, not as a business, because no one was, there wasn't even Google AdWords, the little ads that Google used to have. That wasn't even invented yet. There was no way to make money off of blogging at that point. Like, no one was making money. So it was really a hobby and a diary. And it became a thing. Actually, it became a thing. I remember I was contacted by a literary agent who also went to Yale, who asked me had I ever thought about writing a book. This was in early part of 2004. I was like, oh, sure, I don't, like, okay, let's do it. Like, I had no idea what writing a book meant. And it wasn't until I got my first book deal with Random House that I was like, this is a business. This is actually, like, I can actually get money for doing this and, like, talking about shopping. Oh my gosh. Until that point, I did not leave my job as an epidemiologist because there was no money to be made. So the fashion thing is part of my background, yeah, but it's not where I invest. I invest in health companies. That's where I want to invest, and that's what I enjoy. There's a lot of folks who have varied backgrounds. It doesn't mean that they have to invest in that space. Now, if a young, not even young, if just a woman came who's like amazing, has a great fashion company, even though I may not be able to invest, I can do small personal investments. That doesn't mean that I don't talk to other investors. We have a whole community of investors. I have a number of friends that run successful venture funds that invest in consumer goods, who invest in SaaS companies, who invest in fashion. And so while I might not, that doesn't mean that I can't make the connection for them to someone else. And I often do that. It's like, you know what? This is not what I do, but I know my friend here does. Send me your, 4-sentence elevator pitch. I will pass it on to them. I only do warm intros, so I will pass it on to them. And if they're interested, I will gladly make the intro to you.
Well, friends, let's offer a warm round of applause for Kathryn Finney.
Take a book or two.
Yeah, take a book or two. Kathryn, thank you for your generosity and your time and just sharing your wisdom and your power and your energy. It's just so encouraging, I think, for the Fargo-Moorhead community here. And I just know, especially our students have been deeply touched by the exchange. And so thank you so much, and all the best to you in your future ventures. I just want to say as a final word, quick announcement. Our next event will be on February 15th, and will feature Nadine Strauss. And Nadine is one of the U.S.'s most outspoken free speech advocates, and was formerly the president of ACLU from the late 90s until, I think, 2008, roughly, till around that time. So she'll be here to talk about free speech controversies. It promises to be, as the name suggests, controversial, but nonetheless very interesting. So I hope you all will check that out. We have some business cards on the table that have QR codes that will take you straight to the website where you can find information. Again, thank you all for attending, and Kathryn, thank you so much. If you want to be in the picture, we can do a group picture. Yeah.